judges need speaker orders?
Got it figured out.
Okay, cool.
Would you like the resolution before we begin?
That'd be awesome.
All right. The resolution is the United States Congress should pass a bill rewriting all federal laws to use gender-neutral vocabulary unless a specific gender is necessary to be indicated. U.S. Congress should pass a bill rewriting all federal laws to use gender-neutral vocabulary unless a specific gender is necessary to be indicated.
Okay, everyone ready to go? All right, start my time now. The 8 point is the resolution analysis. Observation 1 is the resolution. The resolution is the United States Congress should pass a bill rewriting all federal laws to use gender-neutral vocabulary unless a specific gender is necessary to be indicated. We the affirmative believe that all definitions are contextually implied unless you ask in the PMC. We're going to be reading inherency as to specifically what the implementation of this looks like, so that should clarify any questions the negative has on that matter. The second observation is that our plan text and our 1AC is rhetorical advocacy, which means that any of the arguments that we make in this round have both post-fiat and pre-fiat implications. Next, moving on to the inherency. So the B point is the inherency. So the first point under the inherency is that right now the state of Washington has passed a bill that is making existing state laws gender neutral, but this only applies to state laws. This is according to the Huffington Post. So this means a couple of things. So first of all, when there are laws that specify things like a journeyman plumber, this word would be changed to a journey level plumber. Or if a state law said something such as a signalman, this would be changed to signal operator. This is what it looks like in implementation. However, there were cases in which there aren't any substitutes for specific gendered language. For example, in terms of some civil engineering terms, such as a manhole or a manlock, no viable alternatives were found to these words. So when this was implemented in Washington, those words were left with their implementation of the current gendered language. The second point under the inherency is that right now, a few states have made such changes. So far, California, Hawaii, Maryland, New York, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Utah have passed similar laws that have made their vocabulary and state laws gender neutral. However, this idea really isn't spreading as quickly on the federal level or on other state levels, which is why federal level implementation is specifically key. Thus, the plan text. The United States Congress will pass a bill rewriting all federal laws to use they, them, their pronouns instead of he, him, his pronouns, and words such as signal operator instead of signalman, which is sort of the example that I provided at the beginning. And unless gender-specific words are necessary, this is what we're going to be using instead. Time frame for this is as soon as possible. Funding will be through normal ways and means, although none will be needed. The weighing mechanism for the round is net benefits. There are a couple of reasons why you should be preferring weighing this round on net benefits. The first reason to prefer is that it's the most fair because it allows teams to run the greatest number of arguments, and number two, it's most educational because consequentialism allows you to weigh your impacts the best. Yes?
So are you saying that within the bill that is passed, they will have all of the modifications, or will the bill mandate that someone else in Congress go and change every single law that's been passed?
So the implementation is that this bill says that now these current bills have to be modified so that these words are replaced with certain pronouns. Yeah, that's what the Washington implementation looked like. So that means you have to go back to the other laws and change the words in them, yes.
So is it Congress who's going to go back and do that, or does the bill like create?
Right, so there are existing congressional committees that deal with rewriting laws, and the resolution specifically says pass a law that will mandate the rewriting of current existing laws, so that's what's going to happen. And this is unconditional, by the way, in case you want to know. Yeah. Okay. Advantage 1, same-sex marriage. The 8 point is the uniqueness. Right now, there's only one Supreme Court ruling that has upheld same-sex marriage. That's Obergefell versus Hodges, and this ruled in favor of same-sex marriage. And the interpretation was that this was constitutional, even if the U.S. marital code still used words such as husband and wife. However, this decision is probably on the brink right now because Neil Gorsuch was recently confirmed to the Supreme Court, which means that this has changed the balance in the Supreme Court, which means that the Supreme Court is now dominantly conservative and dominantly Republican. And in the past, Republicans usually vote against or they vote in favor of states' rights when it comes to social issues, which means that this decision it is probably on the brink of being overturned by whatever decision Neil Gorsuch makes. I'll take your question at the bottom of the advantage. So this means, this is why using general neutral terms is specifically key to making sure that this law is going to remain in implementation and that we're going to see the continued legal status of same-sex marriage. So next is the links. So first, The first link is that the plan is going to, number one, make it so that the marriage code is edited so that like now instead of having just husband and wife, we're going to refer to them as married couples and spouses. So this means that whatever whatever arguments that states are currently using to get rid of these laws aren't going to apply anymore. The warrant for this is that Lewis Capps, who is a Democratic representative from California, says that such recognition is necessary to combat discrimination, even if there was a SCOTUS decision. So C is the internal links. Because this is now the marriage code is going to be protected, same-sex marriage is going to be protected. Pretty simple. D is the impacts. Number one, we're going to be increasing quality of life for people because now they don't have to worry about the legal status of what same-sex marriage is because a lot of people currently worry since the Supreme Court is really Republican. So this increases quality of life. This fights oppression. Number two, it also increases living conditions because you don't have to worry about the status of your marriage. And this is also going to decrease hate crimes and it's also going to decrease dehumanization because you don't have to deal with those factors.
Question?
Yeah.
Okay, so to be clear, out of the PMC, are you claiming any rhetorical benefits to the YAF, and if not, under what conditions will you?
Like the plan text is unconditional, we're claiming rhetorical benefits. So like if you run a critical position, we can leverage our 1AC as rhetoric against the K.
So, but if we read policy positions, are you going to try to outweigh them with rhetorical impact, yes or no?
No, it's just going to be post-fiat debate.
Cool.
Okay. Advantage 2, dismantling heteronormativity. Is unique. Is number one, language and policy spills over into public discourse. So this means that when people who are defending their policies go on like late night talk shows or just like any sort of talk shows to defend whatever policy that they're passing, they use specific sound bites and specific words that translate into the public. So for example, the conservative sound bite that marriage is between a man and a woman proliferates, and that was one of the reasons that's why like the Defense of Marriage Act was passed. And as a result, we see that like in the status quo, there are 1,115 hate crimes against members of the LGBT community in 2014 alone. This is according to 538.com. The second point under the uniqueness is that the state uses static notions of identity to oppress members of the LGBT community. The warrant for this is look at North Carolina's bathroom laws. The third point under the uniqueness is that people see anything outside of this gender binary as illegitimate because number one, the state doesn't recognize it. So if the state doesn't recognize it, then it obviously must be false. So we see that the state recognition of these people is uniquely key to solving. So B is the links. The first link is that the plan is going to pass, which means that a lot of these pronouns and words are going to be changed so that it actually has a legal ground for legitimacy for lots of LGBTQ activists. But the second link is this is perceptual because when the government says that these people are people too, then that changes public perception over time, if not immediately. So C is the internal links. The first one is that because this is going to change, number one, increase the legal grounds for LGBTQ activists to pursue litigation under states. But number two, this creates a perception that spills over into how exactly the public perceives members of the LGBTQ community. D is the impacts. Number one, we're pretty much going to be reducing the oppression that people of the LGBTQ community face because we're going to be reducing hate crimes because people no longer otherize them and see them as people, which is exactly what they are. Vote out.
Okay, the order is 2 off case. We negate the first disadvantage is going to be presidential opposition. The ace point is that Trump is strongly opposed to gay rights and to feminism. There are a couple of subpoints under this. The first argument is that according to Human Rights Campaign, Trump is one of the worst candidates in terms of gay rights in a very, very long time, both in terms of his opposition to top-level court decisions as well as his opposition to the sorts of bills that allow for protection of people in the future. The specifics on this is that Trump called Obergefell, which is a decision that actually legalized gay marriage, a terrible decision, as well as the visa point that he's repeatedly said that he basically does not support any sort of federal protection in terms of things like workplace discrimination against the LGBT, in terms of things like protecting the sorts of rights to make sure that people are required to serve those who are LGBT. The second argument is that Trump ran on a fundamentally family values platform, and that especially to please the conservative wing in the space that he's required to tie himself to the family values principles that he put himself on, which was what allowed him to win the support of the evangelical wing of the Republican Party. And the base point of that is that Trump voters are disproportionately likely to oppose gay marriage, disproportionately to be in a situation, disproportionately likely to oppose gay marriage, and to oppose the sorts of things that the affirmative plan is talking about. The third argument is that Donald Trump briefly considered a rule in February of 2017, which would have completely rolled back federal enforcement on LGBT laws. Argument is that currently Obama, through executive order, has passed legislation saying things like there should be workplace protections against discrimination for LGBT individuals, and he said that he has the authority to do this under Title IX, but Trump has full executive authority to roll back those protections at any time. Argument that the fact that he didn't do so is ultimately just a matter of the fact that he didn't have a reason to do so at that point. The matter of fact is that Trump would be ready to that Trump would be ready to reverse on that issue. And the fourth argument is that there's increasing amount of political pressure for Trump to deliver a win to his base on one of the issues they care about, because he's already lost on healthcare, he's already lost on the Muslim ban, or he's about to lose in the Muslim ban, all of which indicate that people are looking for a win from Trump. The links. The first argument is that Donald Trump would veto the plan. Our argument is that durable fiat and parliamentary debate guarantees that Congress would pass the plan, but only that Congress would pass the plan, and not that it would become law, because there are additional steps involved in becoming a law, and because this would require the support of Donald Trump as well. Our argument is that Donald Trump would veto this plan, and that there's absolutely no guarantee, that there can be absolutely no guarantee in the plan that veto would be overridden by Congress, which ultimately means that this would result in the failure of the plan. No solvency whatsoever means you can vote negative. The second argument is that this would lead to inevitable conservative backlash, even if it passed. Argument is that Donald Trump would feel the need to deliver a win contrary to the idea that Donald Trump runs on making America great again, and everyone's like, why? When Donald Trump is running on 1950s values, and then somehow we show up with a gender-neutral pronoun bill, that is probably going to put Trump in a position where he needs a contrary win through something like, for instance, reversing protections for LGBT individuals. The impacts. The first is workplace discrimination. Our argument is that LGBT individuals every year are going to suffer a huge amount as a result of workplace discrimination, which does things like lower their wages relative to non-LGBT individuals, and results in things like poverty, which is disproportionately likely, as well as homelessness in the LGBT community, and responsible for tens of thousands of deaths every year. And the second argument is going to be just a question of stigmas. Arguments that all of their impacts about demonization and hate crimes are going to be turned by this, because a presidential backlash would probably touch off another wave of hate crimes. The second disadvantage is PR backlash. The uniqueness is that there's been significant progress on specifically LGBT issues at a state level. Arguments that North Carolina, after passing the bathroom bill, which restricted who could actually use which sorts of bathrooms, was forced to backlash, was forced to backtrack, was in the process of backtracking on that legislation because of a huge amount of public opposition to these sorts of bills. Also, the fact that more liberal states like California, as they said, have been considering increasing levels of aggressive state protection for LGBT individuals, all of which is a warrant for as to why there's progress coming in the status quo. But 46% of people are still opposed to even the basic idea that people should be able to use the bathroom of their gender identity, which indicates that there is a huge base of opposition to the plan. Our argument is that this progress is easily reversed in a scenario where it results in a scenario where our argument is that the progress currently occurring in LGBT issues is easily reversed. The warrant for this is that after Obergefell versus Hodges, when there was a clerk in Kentucky who said, "I'm not going to enact marriages," and who then faced significant opposition, was jailed briefly for the failure to enact that duty, that ultimately resulted in the failure for that made it much harder to follow up on the momentum of the Obergefell decision, which ultimately indicates that the ability to succeed on these issues is critically tied to a sense of momentum and a sense of whether people think that LGBT activism is going too far or not. The links. The first argument is that according to Golden Gate University School of Law, the Supreme Court already interprets all laws as being gender neutral, even if those laws are not phrased in a gender neutral way. This means that the plan literally has no legal effect, which means it would have a significant portion of backlash from voters who see it as a waste of Congress's time because they see it as having no direct legal effect. Ultimately means that this would result in the sort of backlash that derails current progress on gay rights at a state level. The second argument is this distracts from other sorts of things that are happening and sucks the air out of opposition to things like the bathroom bills in North Carolina, that ultimately the fact is there are significant bad backlashes happening against gay rights in the state level. If we distract from those things by passing a federal law with no effect, that is going to make everything worse. The impact. First, this turns any possibility of being able to solve for hate crimes or LGBT discrimination. And second, this directly causes dehumanization because it allows for the continuation of dehumanizing state level bills like bathroom bills. On the out case. First, on the rhetorical advocacy, I think it's pretty clear what the context of this is, which is to say that if we agree that we're evaluating this at a post-fiat level, that pre-fiat consequences will be a result of post-fiat. If we both agree that we're evaluating the policy level as they conceded at the PMC, all we have to demonstrate is that the app is bad, nothing having to do with the rhetoric, at least what they said and that's what they said out of the last speech. You should probably hold them to it. Next, we say net benefits. Again, we're going to agree with that on the first advantage. The first argument is no solvency. The argument is that a conservative Congress could easily arbitrarily expand the definition of what counts as a necessary exception, which means that this law would probably end up covering no one in the status quo. The second argument is that this decision is not on brink because of stare decisis, which is the idea that the Supreme Court is always committed to being able to follow previous precedent, even if it didn't disagree with it. None of that is changing. The third argument is that there's no brink here because Scalia, who was already on the court when the case was decided, was not enough to vote it down. The reason that this case was decided the way it was not because of Gorsuch or the absence of Gorsuch. It was because Kennedy joined with the liberals, and that is not going to change. The third argument is that Gorsuch just said that Obergefell's the law of the land, and he said that he's not going to overturn it. The fifth argument is that the fifth argument is there's no test case currently in the courts. No one is trying to overturn this, which means that nothing would happen. The sixth argument is that marriage codes are irrelevant. If it's a constitutional question, it doesn't matter what lower laws say, because those lower laws answer the Constitution. There's no way that the phrasing of a lower law results in a higher law being determined unconstitutional. The seventh argument is that defiance is non-unique. People are always going to be opposed to enacting civil rights law and gay marriage law, but that's just because of their own ideology and not because the law says he or she. You said there's going to be backlash arguments. The backlash is worse in a world of, you said it's going to be hate crimes. Arguments hate crimes are going to be worse in a world of backlash. On the heteronormativity advantage. The first argument is that ideology is the reason these sorts of things happen. The reason that people say things like marriage is between a man and a woman is not because they found it in a law code somewhere, because they're deeply studying the U.S. code. It's because they hate gay people. And ultimately, this is going to be happening either way. The second argument is the plan causes a resurgence of heteronormativity by creating a base for organizing. At the point where you say that we are going to pass what seems like an incredibly liberal law that is probably going to create a new base for organization. Also, our argument is that people simply do not get their conceptions of gays from the law. The law gets its conceptions of gays from the people around it. And the hatred that produce things like he or she is not going away. In fact, you're going to produce new backlash and new opportunities for hate crimes and backlash against LGBT individuals to continue and to grow.
Straight down and then next straight down.
All right. Are you touching on top of case or just advantages?
Yeah, I don't really think it matters.
All right.
Is everyone ready? On the top of case, you're going to be extending the plan text, you're going to be extending the inheritance that they conceded that Washington has already passed this law, and also other states want to pass this law as well. This is going to be really critical because they concede the fact that there's already momentum, that it's happening in the status quo. When my partner tells you that specific states have already passed these laws on a state level, you're also going to be extending the net benefits argument that says that we're going to be voting this around on net benefits. If you go to the first argument about same-sex marriage, there are a couple of problems. The first argument that my opponents tell you is that, oh, there's a conservative Congress. Our argument is that, like, this decision's currently on brink, and even if they try to tell you that, oh, like, Gorsuch is going to be replacing Scalia, if their momentum arguments are true, this means that if the Republicans are currently having currently have the momentum, that means that there's a reason that why Kennedy would be able to switch back and vote the other way, which means that this interpretation of the Constitution is still in jeopardy. Additionally, the ruling on versus Hodge was specifically overturning a different ruling, which means that their argument about precedent doesn't make any sense, because if this case was specifically overturning a different ruling, there's no reason why that ruling can't be overturned yet.
Also, Ginsburg is really close to retiring.
Ginsburg is really close to retiring, which means that there's probably like room for one more person to be added to the Supreme Court by Trump. The next argument they're telling you is that Gorsuch is not key. Our argument specifically is that he is key. One, because the fact that when we give you our momentum scenario, if the Republicans are currently controlling the legislative as well as the executive branch, and there's probably a reason to believe that they are able to influence the judicial branch in one way or another, as my partner tells you, with the other judge being able to retire. And they're telling you that there's no test case. However, status quo checks back for this gut check this, there will probably definitely be a test case that happens as a result of the hate crimes that they point out and that we point out, right? They're telling you that lower laws assume the Constitution. However, clearly that's not the case. If these lower laws had to go to the Supreme Court to be challenged because they were not upholding the Constitution, which means that they'll so that means that that's the defensive argument. The next argument, offensive turn, not at this time. The offensive turn here is that if we're able to pass this on a federal level, this probably means that we get access to more solvency, which means you can extend our specific internal link story that says that changing words is necessary, because that means that states can't discriminate. We cite you the example of the representative from California, Lois Claps, who specifically says that this is key in this one instance. They can see this example, which means that on the floor you're going to be giving us the internal link debate. Then they're telling you that defiance is not unique because of ideology, but we're telling you specifically that this law is key to changing ideology, at the point where they can see the example that says that you need this law to be able to enforce people's shift in ideology. Just because we can't change someone's ideology doesn't mean we can't change how they act. Their argument is that a racist is always going to be a racist. Our argument is that even if that person is racist or is homophobic, we can still implement laws that make sure that they can't discriminate or they can't hurt other people, which means that we definitely get access to our impacts of increasing quality of life, decreasing oppression, as well as increasing living conditions and decreasing hate crimes, because they're conceding this no. The second argument about dismantling heteronormativity. Their argument says that like you're not changing our ideology. We're telling you that that's fine. We don't like. First of all, they're conceding the internal link scenario that says that we are changing public perception as a result of this law passing, so you're extending that. The second argument is once again cross-applied, that we don't need to change ideology to have net benefits. Yeah.
Okay, on advantage one on the whole Congress expanding an exception. One, first of all, no warrant for this. Second of all, non-uniquely.
On the argument about Congress expanding to create an exception, first of all, no warrant, which means it's probably not going to happen. And second of all, what was it?
It's non-unique.
It's not unique. It would have happened already in a world in which this plan happened earlier, right? So if you go back to this dismantling heteronormativity, your argument is that there will be a resurgence because of the base of organization. That's simply not true. Like we're telling you that we're changing public perception at the point in which they also concede our link story. They do not do enough work on this advantage. So check this. Don't grant them the argument that resurgence will happen. Additionally, our argument is that like. Yeah, they're trying to tell you something about like North Carolina that only happened as a result of like the NBA All-Star game. Like that's literally why North Carolina said we like when the NBA said we're going to be changing our All-Star game from Charlotte to New Orleans. That is the moment in which people decided that they need to change, which means that institutional shifts in policy are specifically key to making sure that perceptions are changed. They do not respond to these arguments, and then additionally there will not be a resurgence. Like if we saw a resurgence, that was during the 2016 election. That momentum is gone, which means that they have no uniqueness for their resurgence arguments. Then they're telling you that the conception comes from people and like things like that. We're telling you specifically like people are the ones that change the laws, because when we tell you that this law passes in Congress, that probably means that representatives are people which are like representing actual districts in America, which means that if they are able to vote on behalf of those people because we fiat that means that there will probably be a perceptual shift happening in the status quo, not only for that reason, but also because of the fact that they are literally creating a new law, which probably means like they shouldn't get access to these arguments because they're saying like, oh, perception's always going to be the same. However, we're telling you that we specifically need a change in legislature to change this perception. If they're conceding our internal link story, that means that we'll probably get access to also our impacts of oppression and decreasing in hate crimes. Those are going to be net benefits, that reasons why you're going to be preferring the affirmative. Go to the first is that about Trump. There are a couple of problems. They're telling you that Trump is a win right now. We're going to be making the argument that shooting 59 Tomahawk missiles at Syria is probably the win that he got, considering that even Hillary Clinton was on board with this, which means that he had bipartisan support, which is probably a reason as to why he had the shift that he wanted, which means that he doesn't need a win, which means that there's no reason as to why he would veto this plan. But even if you argue that his platform says that he would veto this plan, if we're telling you that, if we're fiating the fact that this law will be passed, this probably means that like they're able to beat back the veto with a 2/3 majority. Yeah.
Also, Trump's willing to compromise with the left. He's willing to like have higher taxes.
Trump's willing to compromise with the left on specific issues since he became president. A lot of the campaign stuff that he's been talking about, he turned back on it, specifically with building the wall, because now he's saying that the project's going to be more costly. The other argument is that like he's been very left on issues such as Iran or Israel, or even in fact immigration, which is the reason as to why you shouldn't buy his campaign promises and slogan arguments. We're specifically telling you that like if they have no reason as to why Trump was specifically going to ban this law, then like there's no reason why he would veto it.
Trump also said he was for gay rights.
Trump also said he was for gay rights. Specifically, he supported gay rights. He supported same-sex marriage. He supported equality in the workplace, and he also supported equal pay. So that's reasons as to why we believe that he is willing to compromise on this issue. Specifically, if we're telling you that momentum happens across multiple states, then this is going to be seen as a win for Trump. Like if he likes it or not, in some instances, which means that there's no reason as to why he would veto. Then they're telling you that workplace discrimination happens on the impacts layer of this. We're telling you that this only happens, like only this bill means that those impacts are not unique to the status quo, because like they're just saying that that's how it already happens. We're telling you that our bill changed this. If you go to the second argument about PR backlash, once again they're telling you North Carolina like already that happened as a result of the NBA All-Star game, which means that we need institutional shifts in policy to be able to change this. Also, they're telling you there's progress in SCO. That doesn't matter. We're going to be winning on time frame if we can make sure that these perceptual links happen first. And then they're telling you that their link scenario literally says that this is a waste of time. However, in a world in which case a representative from Texas wants to pass a bill that says magic is art, and that has not been considered a waste of time, and this is probably not going to be a waste of time either, considering it's more important. Yeah.
Republican backlash means Democratic coalitions.
Republican backlash means Republican coalitions. So in a world with PR backlash, Dems probably win the legislative branch in 2 years.
First, I'm briefly going to touch on top of case, then neg, and then habit order. All right, time starts Now, once again, we negate today's resolution. Right on top of case, they try to extend the fact that right now there's momentum going on. That, as my partner said, is exactly the point. There is momentum in liberal states right now, and my opponents kill this momentum. They kill any ability for these to continue happening on a state-by-state level by making it over a federal level with lots of states, lots of representatives that really aren't going to like this plan. You can look at all the rest of our case as to warrant as to how they're going to actually be killing all the progress that we've made right now and actually be making this situation significantly worse. So the idea that it's passed in other places isn't a warrant as to why it would pass in the federal, nor a warrant as to why they would actually be able to help this. On that case specifically, the first response they make is that the Syrian strikes was a win for Trump. However, the first response is that that isn't what Trump's base wanted. They literally do not want this military intervention. So while a lot of other people are happy with Trump about this, his base specifically is not, because they did not want this type of intervention. They want the family values type ideas. They want the things that help them at home, not intervention in other nations, which many of his base doesn't really know about or care about. Second of all, they say like, oh, Congress would be able to beat back this. However, as my partner makes, and they never really respond to, the acts of overriding a veto and passing a bill and like actually voting for are two separate actions. All they can do under durable fiat is say Congress will pass this bill. They will vote for it. It will get through Congress, but they cannot guarantee that Trump will not veto it. They cannot guarantee that they somehow get the huge majority necessary to override said veto, because that is an absolutely different action. Think about it like this. If a law is struck down by the Constitution, Congress trying to pass an amendment to make it constitutional is a separate action from passing the bill in the first place, which clearly shows how the veto would be able to strike it down. Do you have a question?
No, you answered it. Thank you.
Okay. So you can extend across the fact that right now his family values that he was elected on specifically make it extremely likely that he will be going against this. All they say is like, oh, he can compromise with the liberals. However, we find first off, he's specifically not compromising with them on social issues, as well as the fact that he's still extremely pro-wall. Like even if he's conceding that it'll be expensive, he's still in support of it and is trying to get that passed through the budget. Also, second of all, you can see the double binds, which is either Trump loses, and so loses on this, which means he's going to lash out, which means he's likely going to kill all the other LGBTQ protections, or second of all, he's going to win on this, which probably means their bill isn't going to pass and they have absolutely no solvency. I also say like we shouldn't buy his campaign promises. However, we've clearly seen him acting to try to fulfill those promises. We saw it on the Muslim ban, which failed, which clearly shows that he needs other ways to try to fulfill these promises, which is the warrant as to why he now has a reason to strike down these Title IX protections that he already tried to do and then decided not to because he didn't have enough justification. Also, we find specifically that their support, like he didn't just say this for support, and they say like, oh, he also supported gay rights. However, we see once he started campaigning and realized he needed to get this evangelical base as well as his own base, he went back on this as a presidential candidate. He is not in favor of LGBTQ rights, clearly showing a warrant as to why he would be going against this, as well as the fact that the states that passed this so far are liberal states. So we'll see clear backlash across the country in the fact that many of his voters were not in these liberal states, but were in a lot more conservative states or purple states, which is a warrant as to why he would want to be supporting those to be able to get re-election in the next presidential election. You can also extend across the fact that he literally has political pressure for this base win. Syrian strikes were not a win for his base. They were a win for other Republicans. Sure.
So in a world in which there's PR backlash, does that mean that Trump's popularity goes down?
Against this, I mean, Trump will literally backlash against it to prevent that his own image going down, which probably means we heard everything. On the link specifically, you can extend across the fact that he'll be able to fiat this. Durable fiat cannot prevent that, as well as second of all, the inevitable backlash that if Trump, even if the bill gets passed, he will reverse these other civil rights protections that my partner cites. On the impact level, they say like the bill makes the workplace discrimination non-unique. However, you specifically look at the fact that workplace discrimination is not because of a lack of gender-neutral language in the workplace, but specifically the fact that there are not specific protections and not this movement to help, like the Title IX protections are helping to prevent this and trying to make it better. If we roll that back, all these things that worse, we see more poverty and homelessness, as well as on the stigma states like just the NBA. However, all those changes, like they have the directionality wrong. The public backlash is what led to the change in laws. Like that is the direction we need to be changing. If we're not changing society and if we're creating more of a stigma, which is what the affirmative team's plan does, then that is the thing that will be preventing laws from passing to protect these people. On the second point of backlash, first off, they say like, oh, like we're winning on this time frame, it's perceptual, because my partner already responded to it's perceptual in the bad way, which clearly shows that it's not like a tangible win for the people who actually want protections, but it is a tangible way to show like, look, Congress is getting way too liberal, going out like super far out on the wing, which is a way for different more conservative groups to have this as a rallying point and as a reason that they need to be opposing these types of policies and lashing out against different LGBTQ policies. They make the argument that Democrats would like be more united by this. However, we specifically see that this would lead to a far greater coalescing for the Republicans than the Democrats. It's a lot easy to come together for the Republicans specifically after what they see as an attack versus like something that is split among like a victory versus not. They also make the argument that like Texas wants this weird bill that's not a warrant as to why this isn't a waste of time. They make no response to the Golden Gate Law Institute analysis that this literally has no legal effect. The Supreme Court is already interpreting laws to be gender neutral, which means at best this is an absolute solvency takeout to the app, and at worst means we're wasting time in creating all of this backlash, which is probably a reason as to why you should be voting for the negative. Yeah.
Obergefell proves that liberals are only going to lose their unity after what
Obergefell proves that they're only going to lose their unity after these wins. And we've seen the fact like the judge backlash, etc., made it very hard for them to keep their momentum going. This would suck all their momentum out of it, which means we turn all of their impacts and lead to increased dehumanization. On AFK specifically, the argument they make against the solvency was that we had no warrant for it and like that they are not going to do this, etc. However, we specifically would cite all of their anti-LGBTQ rhetoric and policies as a warrant as to why they would be doing this. We see that this is at best an absolute, worse than absolute solvency takeout, and probably a reason as to why it would get significantly worse, that they can literally just write in exceptions to make the law not effective at all. Second of all, they say like, oh, the Supreme Court is on the brink. However, we specifically see looking at Supreme Court policy that is not on a brink based on their own, how they uphold past cases. They are not going to immediately overturn this. Talk about like, oh, Scalia is not enough. However, first off, we see specifically Kennedy has no reason to switch. He voted for this because this is what he believed. It wasn't because of political pressure. As well as second of all, the fact that Gorsuch is replacing Scalia probably means that we have at best a slightly less conservative court because Scalia was super conservative. Also, they say Ginsburg's going to step down. However, we specifically see she's not going to retire under the Trump administration. Also say like, oh, Gorsuch is going to overturn it. He's going to be influenced. However, he specifically said he would not be influenced by the political branches in this realm, and he specifically sees this as a law of the land, is not going to be going against it. They say this status quo checks. However, they don't respond to the fact that there's no case directly against this. There's no other case for them to be able to do this. On the turn, like they'll have more solvency. However, they specifically don't. They drop the law institute analysis that they literally don't have any sort of solvency. This is a warrant as to why they're not going to have it. They say it's key to change. We specifically say this will only lead to backlash. You can see a turn that this will lead to a more court backlash against this because they see it as going too far, which probably warrant is why it's not going to solve. On the heteronormativity, you can crossplay all the responses they really don't respond to. It's a question of the public shift coming first and the fact that they make this perception all the worse, which only means more dehumanization, more hate crimes.
Okay. Your order is going to be an overview, the AF case in order, then the name case in order. The affirmative team lost this debate in the MG by conceding that there is no legal effect of the plan. Our specific analysis from Golden Gate University indicates that the Supreme Court has already decided that the terms that they refer to should be interpreted in a gender-neutral way. This means the only possible benefit to the act would be perception. The only argument that they could ever go for in the PMR is the argument that changing he or she to they and their in the law is going to end discrimination against transgender individuals and heteronormativity. The problem is they are way behind on the perceptual question of two things. First, what happens when liberals win? And second of all, where does discrimination come from? First of all, it's pretty clear that when liberals win, i.e. Obergefell versus Hodges, they have conceded that this only destroys the unity of the liberal movement. The fact is there's no explanation for why it is that any sort of change or any sort of resurgence in liberal movements would occur as a result of the plan, because this would be seen as another win, and the fact that it's a hollow win wouldn't prevent it from destroying liberal organizing and liberal momentum in the status quo. There are a couple of voting issues. First is going to be Trump backlash. Our opponents have conceded the argument that regardless of whether Trump has the ability to make a veto and have that veto not be overridden, he does have the ability to overturn workplace protections for LGBT individuals, which exist only as a result of executive order. That is a conceded argument out of the MG, extended into the law. This means that the most tangible impact in terms of harms to LGBT individuals and in terms of future discrimination is going to be the possibility that Donald Trump, in retaliation for the plan, will reinstate, will eliminate the protections that Barack Obama established in terms of workplace protections to make sure that LGBT individuals cannot be discriminated against. They will also not be able to answer the double bind in this argument, which pretty much just says that either one or two things happens. Either we win on the veto, Donald Trump is able to prevent the plan from passing and it has no benefits, or Donald Trump gets defeated on the veto, and then Donald Trump does what Donald Trump does when he loses, which is to overreact. The result of which is that Donald Trump would probably overreact by overturning the protections for LGBT individuals that he was already considering overturning before the plan, but didn't have a reason to. The second voting issue is going to be worst state policy. Our opponents are also saying that there's already momentum at the state level in liberal states around changing this issue. But they've also conceded the argument that at the point where a federal policy passes enacting this, regardless of whether that federal policy takes effect or not, that creates a situation of additional backlash, a situation that distracts the air and distracts the focus from where it needs to be. That, for instance, things like the continued opposition and the public opinion forces that forced the NBA to move its game and that have forced North Carolina to reconsider its stance on the bathroom bill requires public consensus around that particular issue, and that a federal bill with no legal effect is probably going to distract from that and make it much harder for activism to solve. Move on to the first advantage. Our opponents have conceded too many reasons why this isn't the way that the Supreme Court works. Not only that Gorsuch has already said he would uphold Obergefell as the law of the land, but also the fact that the 4 conservative justices whom Gorsuch added to the list are not, the 4 conservative justices, including Gorsuch, are not even enough to overturn this rule, as well as the fact that Ginsburg is not retiring, but more importantly, just the fact that this is not the way in which federal law functions. Federal law answers to the Constitution. The Constitution determines what is allowed in federal law. There is no scenario where the text of a federal law would change the way that the Supreme Court interprets the Constitution, because the Constitution determines what federal law is allowed to say and not vice versa. There's absolutely no explanation of why that would change, or why someone like Kennedy, who has a lifetime appointment, would bother responding to political pressure and simply say, never mind, I've changed my mind, I'm going to reverse on same-sex marriage. This means there is no brink. The issue is not on the brink. There's absolutely no chance that the Supreme Court can change. This means the only argument they can go for is the perception argument they make at the bottom of this advantage and at the top of their second advantage. The argument that somehow they cause a public shift and they cause some kind of massive change in terms of how the issue of same-sex marriage is perceived. The issue that they're missing here is, as my partner said, this is all terminally non-unique. What happened after Obergefell? Obergefell was the biggest win that the same-sex marriage movement has had in an incredibly long time. The fact of the matter is that was bad for public perception. It led to an increased backlash. It led to things like bathroom bills. It led to things like a massive backlash against the gay rights movement when, for instance, a Kentucky clerk was jailed for failing to comply with the law. The fact is that legal victories do not lead to public relations victories for the LGBT movement, which is something they have conceded, which means that their plan, in addition to doing nothing, would also be bad for public perception and reverse the problems they are talking about. Move on to the negative case. First, on the first disadvantage, I think it's pretty clear that the substantive harms we are talking about is going to outweigh any possible advantage to the affirmative. The most important way that you can harm an LGBT individual is to prevent them from getting a job on account of their sexual orientation, and that is what is able to happen in a world where Trump repeals workplace protections for LGBT individuals. They have conceded the argument that this is what he would do in reaction to the plan, and they will not be able to answer the double line that says that this is what he does, especially if you make him lose on the plan by overriding his veto, because Trump has a personality, and that personality would compel him to try to give this win to his base, and that because he has been saying this consistently, he will follow through with it. Finally, on the second disadvantage about public relations backlash, they'll go for the argument that they solve this backlash and that the app is critical. There's never an explanation for how that works. They've conceded that public relations is the internal link and that the way to change laws is through public relations, that trying to force a legal change at the level of the federal government is only going to cause backlash and prevent progress that's currently being made at the state level.
So, the roadmap is overview, advantage 2, advantage 1, dissent 1, dissent 2. Okay, everyone ready? Start time now. The overview is that the negative loses this round because they don't understand the nature of our link level arguments on the second advantage. Specifically on the second advantage, we say that our link story is twofold. The first part of the link story is that by passing this law right now, we can increase public perception. But the second part of the link story is that over time, this is going to cause a gradual shift towards more people being accepting of the LGBTQ community. So even if there's short-term backlash, we're still going to be winning that in the long term. This is going to be much better for the relations between the state and the LGBTQ community, which means that we're probably going to be better for LGBTQ rights in the future than a negative is, which is why you're going to be voting for the affirmative. Now, specifically on advantage 2, they pretty much try to cross-apply a lot of the arguments that they make on the first advantage to this argument. But first of all, the MG pretty much answers every single argument coming out of the MO, actually every single argument coming out of the LO when it comes to the first advantage. But even if you don't buy that, the only argument that they're really extending here is that legal battles don't necessarily translate into victory. But we're gonna make the argument that on time frame, sure, in the short term there's going to be backlash, but in the long term we're going to be a lot better for the community because they're dropping the link here that says that long. Okay.
There was no MG argument on either the first or second advantage that somehow, even if you get clobbered in the short term, in the long term you change perceptions. That seems like a pretty new argument about what would happen under the plan, and even if it was in the PMC, it wasn't extended, which means this is a shadow extension.
My partner extends the entire advantage. Maybe he doesn't extend the entirety of the link, but it's in there. We can still use this.
Judge discretion.
Yeah, I'll let you decide. Zooming time down. Okay. So this means even on relations, we're going to be winning this argument. To go specifically to the first advantage now. They say a couple things on this advantage. First of all, they say that Congress is probably just going to expand exceptions. However, we say no more, and also we say that in the status quo, if they were going to do this, they probably would have already done this. This goes conceded, which means that you don't grant them this argument. Furthermore, a lot of their arguments here just collapse to like the Supreme Court. They're saying that Neil Gorsuch says that he's going to uphold Obergefell versus Hodges, but then they're dropping it. There's a really high probability that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is going to retire. They just say that no, it's not going to happen. They don't give you a award for this. So you're going to buy that on probability. It's really likely that you're going to have a really conservative judge nominated to the Supreme Court, and if that happens, then there's a really high probability that you're going to see an increase in the number of test cases and challenges if there isn't protection in the legal language, because the cases that are generated to challenge these things, like such as the legal definition of marriage, arise from the very fact that there are certain pronouns or there aren't certain pronouns in legal language, which means that even if you buy all the constitutionality arguments, that our pronouns argument is going to be controlling internally the test cases, which means we still get offense on this response. And their entire argument about that there are no test cases right now, this is just a defensive argument. Just because there are no test cases right now doesn't mean that there are not going to be any test cases in the future. This goes conceded. Pretty much, on this entire advantage, they don't have any offense. They're just... Okay.
So the argument that you could never have a test case unless you have... The argument that the act prevents there from being a test case to challenge same-sex marriage law seems pretty new. Like, we've been saying that there isn't a test case either way since the start of this debate.
The PMC says that certain terms in the Defense of Marriage Act allow the generation of test cases. We're solving for those.
Judge discretion.
MG says that. Okay, zooming time now. But even if there are no test cases right now, there's probably going to be more test cases in the future, which means they're probably solving for this on probability. They don't have any offense on this argument, which means it's all defensive. Good or dissent number one. They're losing this disadvantage because they're conceding a major response we make on the uniqueness layer, which is that Trump is willing to compromise with the left. The warrant for this is completely dropped by the entire bloc, which is that Trump wants to pass a tax plan, and his tax plan is probably more important to his base. We're going to be making the argument that his base probably cares more about economics than about social issues, which means that Trump's tax plan probably affects them and has more proximal impacts to his base, and it's probably going to be a bigger victory for Trump than going against LGBT laws, which means that he necessarily needs to compromise with Democrats in order to get his tax plan approved, which means that he needs to, in his tax plan, he's probably going to include provisions such as increasing taxes on the rich, which means that he's going to pass this and it's going to give him the necessary victories so that he can score victories and so that he doesn't have to overturn any of these laws. But they're also dropping the response that if Trump wanted to roll back these protections, and if there really were this easy to roll back these protections, he probably would have done that already, because that's pretty much non-unique. Okay, on the entire durable fiat debate, first of all, we say normal means. They don't ask us what exactly normal means is, so we're going to make the extension that normal means that we fiat 2/3 of Congress is going to approve this law. Okay.
You said normal means in the PMC. We said Trump would veto in the LOC. If you wanted to say that normal means the veto gets overridden, that's probably going to be an MG argument that you need to make.
Yeah, the MG does make that argument. It's on the flow that we fiat 2/3 of Congress.
Judge discretion. I didn't hear the normal means argument.
All right. Zooming time now. Which probably means that this plan isn't going to get vetoed, which means the only link that they can go for here is conservative backlash. So we make the argument that conservative backlash, even if it does happen, is going to be outweighed by the Democratic coalescence that happens either in the short term or the long term, which means that they don't really have any impacts on this disadvantage, because either it's non-unique or Trump's going to go for other things to increase his credibility. On the second disadvantage, a lot of the same arguments apply here. Here's the entire debate about the resistance versus the Republican backlash. Here's what happens if this law is passed. If this law is passed in the 1AC, according to advantage number 2, this is going to increase the legitimacy of the LGBT movement, which galvanizes the movement, which increases the push for activism and increases the push for rights. We're going to make the argument that sure, maybe the federal government making laws is not the most effective way to solve for the problems of facing the LGBT community, but just just this law as a political act of like us introducing this law on the Senate floor is going to be enough to galvanize the movement and at least at the grassroots level start brewing a movement that's going to eventually lead to greater momentum, and that's eventually going to reach more reforms at the state level, which is probably going to solve for more of the Republican backlash, because all of the Republican backlash arguments pretty much apply to the federal level. So even if they're winning all their federal level backlash arguments, we're going to be making the argument that introducing this law on the federal level is going to cause like grassroots activism. That's probably going to lead to more reforms in the long term, which means we solve for dehumanization better than they do. That's what you vote. Good round.